Hey everyone, this is Luke Johnson and Robert Schut, and we're doing things a little bit differently today. We're live, baby. We're doing it live. Anything could happen. Anything could go wrong. I mean, it's really essentially the same thing that we do every week because I don't do any sort of editing or anything like that. But at least now people get to experience it in real time, and that might make us mess up a little bit more, knowing that there might be a few eyes on us. But at the moment, there are 0 viewers, so I don't think we have to worry about anything. How are you doing, Bob? You ready to talk about the 17th installment of Kierkegaard's Works of Love? It's 17.
Yes, I'm doing just fine, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about today. I think today's going to be a little bit clearer than it was the last episode that we did. So I'm looking forward to this. So this is your turn, and I'm just going to be your sidekick today. So I'll do my best.
Right on, right on. And in case anyone's listening, be sure to download the Noetic app where we store all this material and where we're trying to create a thriving intellectual ecosystem that gives an alternative to the more vapid social networks out there. But we have to build it before people show up. And today we're going to be laying another brick in that foundation. So we're going to be talking about I believe it is section 4 from part 2. We're going to be talking about love seeks not its own. It takes its cue from 1 Corinthians 13:5, which essentially says, charity seeketh not her own. So, self-love seeks its own good, but man, being a creature made in the image of God, this sort of writing, this presupposes that he ought to pursue something different than his own good. What could this possibly mean in regards to the passionate motivations of both men and God? Well, it's a biblical truth repeated by Kierkegaard that God gives love. It stands to reason if Christ and the Father are one, then Christ also was love. So Christ, as the ultimate physical manifestation of God in this world, desired to draw men in so that they could imitate and become like him. But does that mean Christ sought his own and was an egomaniac, enticing the multitudes to take on his own persona? The clever psychoanalysis might file this whole episode as a narcissistic madman given over to strange forms of sadism and masochism. Though the modern psychologist cannot see what Christ has done and implores us to do as an act of sacrificial devotion. It is at great odds with what we typically mean by self-serving love. So we need to get a handle on the nature of Christ's love, what is sacrificial about it, and how we can imitate it even though we are not him. And so on page 247, Kierkegaard relates, of my Harper Torchbooks edition of Works of Love, God alone is intrinsically capable of seeking love and being himself the object without nevertheless seeking his own. So no human is love, and no true lover seeks to become the object of another person's love. Rather, in our efforts to love people, it seems as if we are to direct them to a relationship with Jesus Christ, not us. If we are not encouraging God as the object of love, then we are seeking our own, and that is self-love, no matter how refined it may appear. There's an interesting side note here. Kierkegaard says that God is not an object, technically, but fundamentally love itself. That's very interesting, and it needs deeper exploration. What does it mean for God to not be an object? If God is not an object, is he what we would call a subject? What a subject is. If God is love and a subject, how do these things fit together? So I'll pause there for a second and allow Bob to interject some ruminations on the matter.
Well, it's interesting when you brought up subject and object. It makes me think that God is beyond being objective and even subjective to a point, because that almost implies that we've got a handle on him. You know what I mean? When we say, well, I understand him, God is the object. Even when we say God is the subject, it almost implies that there's a certain completeness about him rather than an infinite concept of God. And I think that's the danger. It means we've kind of put God in a category. We've put God in the box when we say he's an object. Okay. And there's always that danger because we're the ones in the box, not God. And that's really the danger. That's what I see sometimes happening. And I think sometimes we do that with our theology. Sometimes the object of theology is to turn God into an object or even a subject. So as I think about those words, I kind of think it's best not to try to make him either. We might say he's subjective, but calling him a subject, it's more, even though you call him a subject, it's still kind of a sense objectifying him. So I think we want to avoid that.
Right. I think it's a delicate line to toe. I mean, I think the way that I would shake out on this is to say that God is a divine subject who has an objective existence, that has an existence independent of our sort of intersubjective concept of him, that he is real, perhaps not in the same way that we are real, but real maybe on a higher level. And I think you're exactly right to say that we don't want to talk about God as an object because we put him into a box and then it becomes something that could be potentially philosophically comprehended by man's finite reason, or maybe even vivisected by empirical science, as a lot of people want to do with their interests in, I don't know, sacred geometry or pantheistic physics or intelligent design. And it also becomes a problem, right, if we paint God as an object, right? It's something to be out there and known intellectually. But if God is a divine subject, presumably he doesn't want to just be known intellectually. He wants to be known interpersonally. He wants to have a relationship directly with us. So I think, and when we talk about God wanting to being a divine something divine and interpersonal, I think we need to talk about God being possibly something dynamic, and not something concretized in objective form.
And I think that we kind of passed over a little bit today that term we use, the imago Dei, the image of God. Kierkegaard kind of opens up with that. And just to kind of add that into the conversation it's because we are made in the image of God that we can have a relationship with God. It's not that we have an image of God, that we are an image of God in the sense that we are independently God's and we have divinity, but rather we have the ability to have that relationship with God at a special level. For instance, like a spider can't have the same relationship with God that we do. Even a dog or a cat can't have the same relationship with God that we do. We're made more in an intellectual capacity, a spiritual capacity, to understand the mind of God, at least the mind of God, the heart of God, the spirit of God, not to its fullest capacity for God's capacity, but to the fullest capacity for our capacity. So it's the saying, even though we may know everything we can know of God, there's still more to God that we cannot know.
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up to put the imago Dei back into this.
Yeah, we see through a glass darkly. And I think what's the interesting thing is, like, when we try to imitate God, when we do the imitation of Christ and turn ourselves into an active power of love, I think that might be the greatest manifestation of the imago Dei in our life.
If we do it as Kierkegaard talks about here, which I think you're going to get into, the difference between how we love and how God loves.
Yes,
so
precisely.
I'll let you take it from there.
Okay. So I have maybe a few more questions before we get into that, but it's another curious piece of information that Kierkegaard gives us in this section is that he claims that sacrificial devotion is not an action. And that seemed to strike me as kind of odd, because I think about Christ hanging on the cross, and that seems to be something that he decided to go through it with, or felt predestinated to go through with it, depending on what sort of theological stance you want to take. And so I had to think of myself, how could this not be an act of devotion? And the best answer that I could come up with, at least for the moment, is that the sacrificial love of God is more like a mode of being that is constantly seeking an opportunity to express itself. And I guess in some ways, when we have truly imitated Christ, we become a dynamic mode of being that is in love, that is just constantly seeking out the other and an opportunity to disclose itself. Do you think that's a reach, or do you think that's plausible?
Oh, no, it's not a reach at all. Paul even talks about us being sacrificial to God, offering ourselves as sacrifices to God. So it's not so much an activity or an act. It's not so much an act or an action in the sense that it's something complete. It's more a lifelong project of offering ourselves to God. And it's not the way that most people think of their faith, as is what he's going to talk about. It's not how most people think of love, as being sacrificial. But love, we have to differentiate. This isn't romantic love here, or even poetic love. This is divine love. This is godly love, Christian love. And that requires it, and it's the nature, I think this is what you were getting at. It's the nature of this love to be sacrificial. So it's not something we do in addition to love, but we do it because it is the very kind of love that we have, of self-devotion. Would you agree?
Right. Yeah, I think we're in agreement, you, me, and Paul. Not bad company.
Not bad at all.
Yeah. So the next subsection is called Love Seeks Not Its Own. Getting a little repetitive, but that's okay. If true love does not seek its own, then there ought not to be distinction between mine and yours. Such relational qualifications endure if one's own is still being sought. If there is no one's own, if that has been subtracted from the equation, mine and yours disappear, right? Well, this requires a closer look as to how and when one's own and the corresponding mine and yours are done away with. And first, Kierkegaard asks us to examine justice. Now, he says man's justice gives each person his due. Therefore, it's concerned with one's own. Justice partitions, separates, and typically keeps stability. But when confusion, war, etc. hits, the scales of justice are tossed aside. Things that we wouldn't normally consider permissible within civilized society may become justifiable. Someone who's drowning in a hurricane in Houston right now may feel like they can, air quotes, borrow their neighbor's boat to survive, whereas that would not be permissible under normal circumstances. But love brings confusion also. What kind of confusion? And for the answer to that, I think we need to look to page 248 of the Harper Torch Books edition. I don't know if it's tracking precisely with Bob's edition as well, but he says there, therefore with love too, there comes confusion. In this life-giving confusion, there is no distinction for the lovers between mine and yours. Remarkable. There are you and an I, and yet no mine and yours. So, the more profound the revolution, the greater the distinction dissolves between mine and yours in perfect love. Such a deep revolution causes earthly justice to shudder, for it is based upon partitions. To remind us, what kind of love are we talking about here? Are we talking about friendship and or erotica love, which we've alluded to earlier, that undoes the distinction between mine and yours? Kierkegaard thinks friendship and erotic love are at the core self-love, which has given way to an ours. However, the revolution is not profound enough. And I think really if any of us were to search our soul, we would find that this is true. distinction between mine and yours is still slumbering in the dynamic. You know, I don't know about you, Bob, but I've been so irresistibly close to, God, too many people to count. And I thought we would be forever lovers and friends. But it changes pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
One misunderstanding, one change of events, and quickly that mine and yours reasserts itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. It does surface at times. It's very difficult. I agree. What do you take for his term confusion here? I put down in my notes that he seems to be speaking about this confusion between mine and yours as something positive.
Yeah, because ultimately it at least temporarily erodes the differences, right?
Yeah, right.
Where there's community between the mine and yours. Where I end and where you begin is all confused. It's all scrambled. It's fused together, but not really, because deep down the revolution hasn't been profound enough. It hasn't been sanctified through the God relationship, so that the mind has really been annihilated. And I think that's what happens in spiritual love. Luke stops to exist entirely. We were talking off camera earlier today, and I was just saying, I no longer, as I've gone deeper into my religious experience, I no longer really feel like my life is my own. And I don't, it doesn't make me sad. Mm-hmm. I think what makes me sad is that that's so abnormal. I think what makes me sad is not enough people really understand that.
Yeah. That is a sad situation, especially when you start to try to express that to other people.
Oh,
you get the funny looks. They don't get the idea. It's incomprehensible, though, to an unspiritual mind.
Well, it seems like total madness, right?
It does.
It seems like and this is where like the Nietzschean critique comes in about how Christianity is fundamentally this life-denying ascetic lifestyle. And I would be like, here, of course it is. But Nietzsche was only looking at things from a temporal perspective. There was no higher spiritual realm to adjudicate this matter from. Mm-hmm. So if you take out that plane of existence, of course it's idiocy. Mm-hmm. But if there is a spiritual domain, it's the most prudent and wise maneuver one can do.
Yeah,
because you're thinking long term, like you're making an investment in eternity,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yes, you are becoming part of it, as Kierkegaard says. You're getting out of the temporal and seeing things in the eternal. It's a different point of view. Like I say, and the two, when you're in the eternal and trying to explain it to somebody in the temporal, it's just a whole different language. Sometimes you use the same words, but they don't mean the same things. And that's why we have so much miscommunications and so much of the confusion of the bad kind.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm forever sort of in the plot twist moment of a really epic movie or an M. Night Shyamalan movie. Like, I feel like I'm perpetually like trying to scream in the ear of whoever I'm talking to that Kevin Spacey's character is Kaiser Sosa in The Usual Suspects, but no one will listen. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I just recently, Monica and I just recently saw that movie. That was a very interesting movie. I'm glad you saw that as well.
Yeah, I saw it years ago. What I didn't realize is he has a great line in that scene. That's actually, you and I've studied some poetry of Baudelaire, but he has a great line in that scene where he says the greatest trick the devil ever did was to convince the world that he never existed. And that's from, I believe, from Baudelaire's poem, The Gambler, or something like that. I have to look it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like it would be. It sounds like it belongs there.
Yeah. It's always great. See, this is why I want to put all this stuff in conversation with one another. I was telling Bob about this digital technology I wanted to develop, and connecting Usual Suspects to Baudelaire, to the Bible, would I think it really, really illuminating for a lot of people. So going back to this distinction between the mine and yours still slumbering in the dynamic, how do we get rid of this distinction between mine and yours? We've already talked about this. but he builds up. There's a build up to it that we kind of went beyond, and that's okay. I think it bears repeating. If one takes away the yours of the yours in mine, right? If you're just looking after yourself, one becomes a thief. But he says justice will eventually catch up with you, leaving you with nothing. So there will be no mine. You can't completely exploit people. Eventually, the long arm of the law will catch up. What about the lover who renounces himself, leaving only the yours? Oh, Kierkegaard says the yours completely disappears and the true lover gains everything. And we've talked about this already, but what's going on here? How can not having a mind lead to this? A mind, M-I-N-E, not a mind. He says, nevertheless, the fact that all is his is a divine secret. For humanly speaking, the true lover, the sacrificing one, the self-giving, and in all things self-renouncing lover, he is, humanly speaking, the injured one, the most injured of all, even though he brings it upon himself by continually sacrificing himself. So the one who surrenders himself only looks like the loser in the deal from the temporal and earthly perspective, hinting that we might need new eyes to really understand how one gains in sacrificial devotion. It makes sense how the mine and yours is still there in erotic love, but it is still mysterious how the yours disappears in self-renunciation, the true lover gains. And here is the blessed miracle. By having no mind and self-renunciation, one wins God, and God is everything. So by losing yourself, you gain everything. And this is how one surrenders the mind. There is no yours, and gains everything in self-renunciation. And again, just to repeat it again, this only happens in spiritual love, not the erotic or poetical love that Bob mentioned out earlier. Before I move on, would you like to add anything to that, Bob?
Are you going to use the little explanation he uses about the wedding rings? Because if not, I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, you go ahead and do that. I tend to distill. So sometimes some of those poetical things I skip over. Why don't you tell everybody about that?
Oh, okay. Well, I thought it was kind of interesting. He talks about in friendship, he says and in erotic love, there is a sense of ours, just like there is in the spiritual sense, but it's not as strong as it is in a true love, in the sense of spiritual love. And he uses this idea of the exchange of rings between lovers as a symbol of love. When you get married, you exchange rings, as did I. But in this case, the symbolism is not in ours. It doesn't mean that there's a cessation of mine and yours in a worldly marriage. Each one still retains their individuality, because one would not say, look, here is our ring. They would say, this is my wedding ring, and this is her wedding ring. So he says it goes to prove that even in a marriage, there's still a distinction made between mine and yours, even in the symbolism itself. But he uses a better one where he talks about a blood transfusion. He says, if I was to give you, Luke, a blood transfusion, the distinction between what's my blood and what's your blood evaporates. There is no distinction. It just becomes blended together. So it's kind of a different explanation he gives, but I thought I'd throw that out there. So maybe if there's something that you wanted to talk about, but I thought the wedding ring versus the blood transfusion was pretty good.
Yeah, it is more like that. I think he also talks about blood brothers, which is something that I think was a little bit before my time, because it seemed to be something that was pretty common practice amongst kids, like earlier in the century. I don't know. Do you ever do the blood brothers thing?
Well, I think it came from, I'm not sure the source, but I remember watching it on Westerns where
it feels like this syncretization of like Western and Indian ritual.
Yeah, American Indians or American Native Americans would cut their wrists a little bit, not the artery, just cut their wrists and then put the wrists together and then say, okay, now we're blood brothers. I don't know if that's just folklore or what, but that was my memory of how blood brothers came about. So interesting he
I
should
used to,
use that.
yeah, I used to see it in movies, like where kids would like prick their finger and become blood brothers or something like that. But of course, then we learned more about infectious diseases, and we got rid of that ritual.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, I think even the so-called mafia has a ritual like that, that they pierce themselves and then they become a member of the fraternity. You know.
Oh, trust me, yeah. It's not just the mafia.
Yeah.
But moving on. I don't know anything about the mafia, so but
Well, if there's any mafia, if there's any members of the
nah,
mafia listening in, no offense, okay?
I don't know anything about it. Oh man. All right, so Kierkegaard tells us the true lover cannot be humiliated in deception, for he is not thinking of a mine and yours. He gives everything away. He does not seek his own individuality. The precise opposite is the case. The true lover loves each human being according to their individuality. One may say, all fine and good, that you get this divine love back when you seek the individuality of others. But this is a rather nebulous concept. Aren't you obliterated in the process? So let's see what Kierkegaard says on the matter. On page 253, he writes, to have individuality is to believe in the individuality of every other person. For individuality is not mine, but is God's gift by which he gives me being and gives being to all. He gives being to everything. It is simply the inexhaustible swell of goodness in the goodness of God that the Almighty nevertheless gives in such a way that the receiver obtains individuality, that he who created out of nothing nevertheless creates individuality, so that creation over against him shall not be nothing, although it is taken from nothing and is nothing and yet becomes individuality. So that was very complicated. Let me see if I can break it down. So what seems to be fascinating here is that in our act of self-renunciation and love towards others, we are filled with the goodness of God and become increasingly individualized. But what exactly does that mean? Why not think of ourselves as mere meat puppets controlled by God? Why think that God bestows individuality upon us? There seems to be some divine elevation going on here, where we are freed from the grip of the self-love that drives all our romantic and platonic relationship, and God sets us up on our own. Of course, this is not an exhaustive account of what individuality is for Kierkegaard, but we get to see some of the contours of the account here. So what I'm trying to say here is in this act of self-renunciation and focusing on the individuality of others, we are filled with the Spirit of God and taken out of the gears of temporal life and are dwelling on a higher plane of existence in some sense and are drawn before God. And I think that's what we can talk about when we're talking about an intensification of individuality on this Christian existentialist perspective. Unless I'm way off course. What do you think, Bob?
I think that the individuality here he's speaking of is a necessary requirement in order for us to have responsibility. It's kind of hard to have responsibility if you don't accept your individuality. And we know that one of the basic things of Kierkegaard is that we need to appear before God as an individual. We can't appear before God as a group. We can't appear before God even as a member of a church or as a member of anything. We have to stand before God as an individual. And it reminds me of his, in his other writings, he speaks of the night of resignation. In order to come to this sense of resignation, we have to come to the sense of individuality. And it's filled with guilt and it's filled with all these things to finally get to that point where we can be, a knight of God, where we can resign ourselves to our earthly lives and become a servant of God, which is what a knight really was a servant of the king, willing to give his life for the benefit of the king. So I think it all ties together into even his other writings. Which one was that? The Night of Resignation. That was
The night of resignation, infinite resignation, is the penultimate step before the night of faith.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly, I mean, I think we see this in Fear and Trembling. I think we see this idea developed to its greatest extent, which means if we really are, as Knights of Faith, under some sort of divine obligation because we have met God face to face, then our servitude is love. But what's interesting is, does it really feel like servitude? Does it, when you are filled with love and you're trying to focus on the individualities of others through that Christian love, do you really feel like you're serving a king? Or do you really feel yourself to be kind of an extension of the king?
Well, I feel like I receive my honor, if I want to say it, or my satisfaction is a better word. My satisfaction by glorifying God, not myself. That takes a while to get to. That's probably maybe a little further away than most people get. But I feel more benefit and more satisfaction when I bring glory to God, and people can praise God and say, look at how wonderful God is, rather than say, look at how wonderful I am. Look at how smart Bob is. He's able to do this. Look at, to me, that in the early years, that probably was pretty cool. I liked that. But as I've gotten older, hopefully more mature, I don't care about that. That makes me feel very uncomfortable. I rather people say, now I can glorify God more fully because of what you've said. That makes me feel good, because now I know God is being glorified. So that's how I kind of differentiate between those two ideas. Yeah.
Do you think God delights in the glorification of us in that dynamic relationship?
Yeah, I do.
Mm-hmm.
I do. As long as it doesn't become part of our ego. I think he's happy when other people see us as we are. Absolutely. I think he reflects just like we would if we painted a picture and put it in a museum or something and it got awards. I think we would be happy because, like our creation isn't that great. Probably a different scale here, but the idea is I would feel good if my work was praised, as I think God feels good as his work is praised.
So we delight in the glorification of God, and God delights in it becomes a cycle, right? And then God finds great pleasure in that as well, right?
Yeah. It's a circle, it's just completing the circle.
Yeah. It's a pretty awesome idea. I do not use that word awesome lightly.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can find my place. So yeah, but the critic may say that all this implies that erotic and platonic love doesn't really value individuality on this account, and that doesn't seem to be true. We see all sorts of people who aren't Christian who, seem to very much value the individuality of others. But what Kierkegaard says, these forms of love value individuality to an extent, though it is limited. For instance, he uses the example of lovers. Such individuals do not stop lovers from loving them. If being the beloved would be a threat to his beloved's individuality, it is unclear if the person that was in a relationship that was erotic or platonic would stop it. Because they're still seeking their own. This would not happen necessarily with true love. That might be debatable. That someone would renounce a friend for their own good, or renounce a lover for their own good, even though they were benefiting greatly from it. I don't know. Can you think of an example where that may be true?
Where a person would renounce another person's love.
Right. Because it may be doing some harm to that individual's individuality.
That would be a very special person, I think, to do that. I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know about a person who would totally do that, but I think that we need to do that continually. We need to be continually aware of that. I think what Kierkegaard was getting at here is that in a love relationship, in a romantic love relationship, even if we renounce our love for another and say everything is yours, he says we create a polarity. So we haven't really renounced mine and yours. We've just made everything yours. So if this is what he means by renouncing another person's love, what he's saying is that we've just created a polarity. Because even though there's no mine, everything is yours, we have to eliminate both ends of this polarity. We have to eliminate yours as well as mine. So we have to stop seeing things in those two categories. He says only in spiritual love does the mine really disappear. So I think he's trying to say here is that this idea of polarity I thought was kind of interesting. That we have to see the other person differently than a yours. We have to bring the person into ourselves, like love your neighbor as yourself. Remember that from the Sermon on the Mount. We have to love our neighbor as ourselves. So that idea of mine and yours disappears with self-renouncing love. I think he's saying that you can't really totally do that. But what you're saying here is a little differently. That's why I was kind of a little confused there at the beginning. But I think what we're talking about here is that he says the true lover only understands that he's vulnerable to be fooled and deceived as he gives without expectation of return. This is ridiculous in the eyes of the world. When we love another person the correct way, we make ourselves vulnerable and allow ourselves the possibility of being deceived. So the true lover doesn't love his own individuality. What he's trying to do is to help the other person become an individual, but only in the sense not a mine and a yours, but an individual in the sense so that they can stand before God as an individual. I know that's kind of splitting hairs. How do you become an individual without being a mine and a yours? But this is what he's trying to do here. He's trying to say, I have to make you an individual. And then he puts the caveat in here. He says, I have to not only make you an individual and aware of your individuality, but I have to help you do it without you knowing I'm helping you do it. Because if you know I'm helping you, then I've defeated the whole idea. Then you're not really an individual. You're depending upon me. And I think you're probably going to get into this, so I don't want to.
No, it's fine. You can anticipate it. Yeah. And I mean, they would be totally deceived, right? You can't be an independent yet being totally reliant on someone else for that relationship with God, or to be free from the deception of the world, which I believe Socrates, the noble rogue, was his mission statement.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say, the only quibble that I would have with anything you say, that I think if we are true lovers and in erotic relationships, then we cannot be deceived. I think that would be the only thing that I would say, because it doesn't really matter what the outcome is, because certainly there can be things that can be unfortunate and be unsettling if certain outcomes didn't really go our way. But the ultimate outcome that we're concerned with is the God relationship, and we can't be deceived out of that. Our lover may leave us, our best friend may betray us, but no one can deceive us out of the God relationship. We can't be deceived about the thing of the greatest priority. So I would say we're not vulnerable to deception in regards to that. Whereas the erotic lover and the platonic lover, if they're still existing in those categories, they very much can be deceived out of everything, especially if they have deified the friend or the lover instead of God.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Their significant other into a goddess or a god.
Yeah. Now, it's very difficult when you have here a marriage, which he talks about here too, when you have a romantic relationship, and that relationship is also within the framework of a spiritual relationship. Each person is trying, or should be trying, to help the other person be an individual, but not wanting to take credit for it and stand back and say, see, look what I did for you. See how I've helped you. I've made you who you are. It's about, you have to make the other person feel they've become this all on their own.
Right.
And that's a very delicate thing, isn't it? I kind of liken this to being a good teacher. A good teacher should teach the other person not so that they can become reputable or a big name or even a pastor. Is supposed to teach the congregation about God, not so that they are glorified, but so that he can step back as though he wasn't part of this at all. And a teacher is supposed to do the same thing. He's supposed to teach an individual something, to be an individual, to help you get to God, but be able to step away from it and say, I had nothing to do with this. That's very, very rare.
Bob, this entire time that we've been friends, have you been tricking me into a relationship with God? I thought it was all me. I thought it was all me. I thought it was my search. But this whole time you've been just playing me like a theological marionette.
You've exposed me publicly now. I'm ashamed.
Exposed, Bob Schut. You made me love God.
But that's what we have to do. And I think that practice has disappeared. I just think it's disappeared. Everybody's forgot to step away from it. You bring people to God and you help them become closer and closer to God. And then you step away. You don't take credit for it. Man, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you and I talk about this a lot. Like, just seeing all these contemporary preachers with their names and lights and all the cameras and smoke shows and all this other stuff. There are a lot of people trying to take credit for converting souls.
All the mansions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
probably shouldn't be doing that, but yeah, who am I to judge? So we've been jumping around here. In closing, he takes into consideration Socrates as his philosophical midwife, and Socrates always worked for the other's advantage, concealing himself and suffering great misunderstanding. Oh boy, can I identify with that lately. And when Socrates was interrogating people, he was really hiding what his true motives were, that he was trying to get them to stand on their own, to liberate them from the false doctrines and deceptions that they had either come up with on their own or had been taught elsewhere. And he was so good at it, he didn't, people didn't even realize that they were being helped. That was even hidden.
Yeah.
Now, Kierkegaard didn't think the noble rogue was totally analogous to the true lover, though they had a great deal in common. And Socrates was very conscious of how he helped another towards standing on their own. He had this sort of wry little smile kind of at the end of every interaction, always kind of had the moral high ground, wishing people well whenever they would stomp off in anger. And so Socrates was very conscious of how he helped others in standing on their own. However, the noble rogue, I don't think we can say that this noble rogue of Socrates really loved his subject. He was disinterested. I don't like when I try to evangelize to people, I don't just really ask them questions so they are reduced into a state of aporia, right?
Mm-hmm.
I may ask them some questions so that they are shaken out of their well-worn routines, and I may present them with some evidence that they may not have considered. But I'm not trying to win an argument. But I am trying to do something. I don't really even know what I'm trying to do. But I think what we need to ask ourselves here in this assessment that Kierkegaard has given, and then maybe move on to this question about what we're really trying to do when we are true lovers, is how Kierkegaard could say that Socrates was on one hand helping but not loving his subject simultaneously, that he could be disinterestedly helping but not loving. Is that oxymoronic, or do you think that's possible?
Oh, I think it's possible. Oh, I think you can help somebody and be disinterested for the sake of knowledge. I think that the Socrates, knowing what I know of him anyway, the limited knowledge I have of him, and it's difficult to be able to, project ideas onto Socrates, but it's certainly possible to love knowledge and love the sense of teaching somebody just for the sake of knowledge, not so much loving the individual. So in this way, he's disinterested as far as love is concerned. He's not interested in love, but be more interested in love of knowledge rather than love of the individual. But this isn't what our role is. I think is what he's getting at, right? That our role is to love the individual so much that we're willing to let them become an individual on their own without weakening that with our help, their knowledge of our help, which takes a very special person to be able to do that.
Yeah. Maybe the 259, this quote from 259 will help us with the distinction. He works without pay, for he makes himself nothing. And precisely at the moment when it could be said that he still could have the reward of proud self-consciousness, God enters in and he is again transformed into nothingness, which nevertheless for him is his blessedness. So I think that's kind of a big distinction between the true lover and Socrates. There's no real satisfaction of gaining knowledge or besting somebody in dialectic or anything like that. There's always sort of this sense of like utter humility and annihilation that goes along with being a Christian lover.
Look, you just opened up something for me here. You just gave me some knowledge here, some information that I think is really good. All the people today who are missing the point, all those who are preaching for money and gains, teaching for that, the day will come when they are confronted with God as an individual on that day of judgment. And just like I was reading to my Bible study on the verse from Matthew, I think it was chapter 8, it says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father. Many people are going to say to him on that day, look at all the wonderful things I've done for you, Lord, all the preaching. I've brought 10,000s of people to you. And God is going to say, yes, and you have a mansion, you have a swimming pool, you have your own private jet. You've already received your reward. I think that's going to be the time that they realize that to receive the worldly reward now is in place of their heavenly reward. So they better enjoy it.
Well, and I think, something I'm trying to toe this line on this particular subject, because I mean, I'm not a person of great financial means. I have more than others, so, have I done everything that I can? Someone from another country, someone from Rwanda or something like that may look at me as as being one of these wolves in sheep's clothing, right? Like, you have all of this, like you have a refrigerator, and you know,
Yeah.
I guess there's this perspective that I want to keep with this, right? Is like, what does it really mean to live a Christian life? I mean, is it an utter vow of poverty?
Well, if you went to Rwanda to live and built a mansion with a swimming pool in the middle there, in front of all these people who live in abject poverty, I think the answer would be more clear.
Yeah.
If everybody had mansions and swimming pools, it wouldn't look so odd. But the difference is that you ask yourself the question. Other people don't even bother to ask themselves to say, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do. They seem to be totally satisfied with the situation. And I'm really not going to judge them. I'm not going to say, but I think that they ought to be judging themselves. I really think that. I really think that we should always be asking ourselves the question, when is enough enough? And when is what I'm doing, am I doing this for the work of the Lord? Does it appear to others that I'm strictly doing this for the work of the Lord? Or does it look like I'm doing this to profit myself? And that's, I think, where people need to draw the line. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say, I like to use my resources in order to bring education to people. I wonder if God would be like, that was fine, but there were starving people, and that money could have been better spent.
We're all going to be in some kind of a judgment in that frame. Absolutely, we all will be. But we all need to ask ourselves those questions continually. How we spend our money, what we do,
right. Because I think what we're doing, right? Because I think what we're doing right here glorifies God. Certain amount of to do that, right? If I, as terrible as my internet connection is, if I didn't have it, we wouldn't be able to glorify God in this way.
Yeah.
But I could also do without it and send that money and sponsor a child somewhere. So it's an interesting line that we all need to ask ourselves. I live pretty modestly, but money that I set aside so that we can make something like this happen. Which is a topic for another day, but at least we're thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's a between Socrates and the true lover. It's just, but the true lover and Socrates are seeking very different ends, are they not? The sort of self-sufficiency Socrates is trying to bring about is quite different from what the true lover is trying to bring about, are they not? Socrates is largely a deflationary character who seeks to free people from false concepts. Does not the true lover aim to recommend an alternative once the person has been set free, specifically Jesus Christ? Is our love for the other supposed to be, are we offering testimony through service? What I just found Kierkegaard to be so coy on this stuff. It's interesting, when I read the scriptures a lot, it's very explicit about what we are to do. And I know from my own personal experience that if you're too intense and give people too much information, they won't listen to you. So I understand that Kierkegaard is being coy, but I mean, he doesn't really say, like what the true lover does in that dynamic. Okay, is this a perfect time to sort of minister to the person and like prove the authenticity of Jesus as the Son of God, or is it just an opportunity to? It's like to be filled with God's love and that's our testimony once we deflate false concepts and try to extricate people from this world. And what do you think the true lover really does? I guess it can be multifarious, right? I guess it can depend on the person that we are loving, right? There are going to be some individuals who need a philosophical argument, and there are going to be other people that are going to need something else. What do you make of this, about the difference between the true lover and the Socratic lover?
Well, I think the true lover, Luke, is something that we seek to attain. I don't think I've attained it. I don't think that I'm there, but it's the image that I seek after. Jesus is the true lover. Okay. So I have a vision of the true lover. I know what he looks like. I know what he did. I know what he gave up. Can I do that? I don't know, but I want to. That's my goal, to set myself, Jesus, that's my goal. I want to be like that. I don't know if I can ever attain that. I got a lot to learn. But the important thing is that's what I want. That's my goal. That's my end game, to be like that. To be the true lover. Not in the sense of Socrates. If I'm right in saying that Socrates loved knowledge and he did it for the sake of knowledge, I'm not doing this for the sake of knowledge. I'm doing this for the sake of God. And I'm still got room in my life to improve. But as Jesus says, first seek the kingdom and everything else will be added unto you. So I seek the kingdom. I seek my place in the kingdom. And that's a spiritual kingdom. And I seek God. I seek the righteousness of God, the love of God, the grace, the mercy of God. All that's part of what I'm looking for, part of what I'm seeking after. So we have to examine ourselves every day and make sure we're always continually striving towards that. So that's what I try to do with my life. Strive towards it, knowing that I'm not there yet. But and Paul even said that, I'm sorry, I don't remember. I think it was Ephesians. He says, not that I've already attained perfection, but I strive to make it my own. Okay. And knowing what his past was, but knowing where he's going to continue to go. So I kind of used that whole idea of I know where I've been and I know where I want to go. And I don't let the past drag me down. I just have to keep going towards the perfection, towards what God wants from me.
Right on. So, it was very well said. So we need to close out here because I have a birthday party to get to, Bob.
Is it yours?
No. A friend's.
Oh, okay.
Who I truly love. So Kierkegaard closes with asking if the lover's life is lived in vain. And from two different perspectives, we can say yes and no. From the temporal perspective, and I've said this earlier, the true lover has sacrificed himself for others. But in another sense, no, for he becomes transformed into an active power in the hands of God. And it's in my estimation that one would have to think that he gains much in the long haul, and that would be a very prudent decision, where he gets to be filled with God's goodness and draw close to the power that created him. So that is the lesson that I have prepared for us. And I'll give Bob any sort of closing thoughts.
I think I'd like to leave it end on what you just said. I think you tied it all up very nicely at the end. So did a great job. Thank you.
No problem, man. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'll have the improved audio version up later tonight. Download the Noetic app. And I know I say this all the time. We got a lot more coming. Just so happens that building an intellectual ecosystem is a lot harder than I first imagined. So we'll be there soon. Thanks for climbing the mountain with us. All right. Take care, Bob.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.